Hi, I'm Dorian, and my wife smiled when she signed the divorce papers like she'd just thrown out the trash. Her family laughed, mine stayed silent, and I walked out of that courtroom with nothing but a silver pen my father once gave me. The same father I thought had abandoned me. But when the judge opened his sealed will, her smile vanished. You ever wonder what it feels like to be erased by your own blood, and then handed back the truth in front of them all? The sound of the gavel cracked through the air like a rifle shot. It was a Wednesday morning, but inside the county courthouse everything felt still and stale, as if time itself had been scrubbed out. The walls were a washed-out beige, the kind of color meant to make you feel small. The faint hum of the fluorescent lights mixed with the shuffling of papers, and somewhere behind me, a chair squeaked as someone shifted their weight. My palms were damp against my knees, but I kept my posture straight. After everything, I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me collapse. Across the table, Valora sat like she was posing for a portrait, shoulders back, chin tilted, lips painted with that deep crimson she always wore when she wanted to play power games. She didn't look at me. She looked at the clerk as she reached for the divorce papers, her manicured nails tapping out a rhythm on the wood. When she signed, she did it with a dramatic flourish, like a performer bowing at the end of a show. Then she capped the pen and smirked at me, her voice slicing through the room. Good riddance. A ripple of laughter rolled from the row behind her, her brothers and cousins, their arms crossed, smug smiles on their faces. One of them whispered something, and another snorted loud enough for everyone to hear. I caught a stray phrase. He never belonged in our league. It felt like high school all over again, being the youngest, the one asked to carry boxes while the others took credit for the work. Except now, it wasn't lockers and hallways. It was a courtroom, and my marriage was being dismantled in front of strangers. I felt my jaw tighten. My instinct was to speak, to defend myself, but my father's voice echoed in my head, calm, deliberate. Sometimes you win by holding your tongue, son. So I sat, staring at the grain of the table, and let the humiliation settle like a weight across my shoulders. My breath came slow. If they wanted me to explode, I wasn't going to give them that gift. Not yet. Valora's eyes darted to my breast pocket, where the silver fountain pen peeked out. My father's pen. He had handed it to me at the hospital a week before he passed, saying only, "This will matter when the time comes." It had been with me through every signing, every job contract, every note. Now Valora tilted her head and said just loud enough for the court reporter to catch, "Still carrying that relic, figures." She looked back to her lawyer and chuckled. I pressed my palm over the pen, feeling the etched ridges under my fingers, a quiet anchor in the storm. The judge, a heavy-set man with a graying mustache, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. He'd watched the little performance without expression, but now his tone shifted. "Before we conclude," he said slowly, "there is an additional matter tied to the estate of Mr. Whitmore." Valora's smirk twitched. Her lawyer leaned toward her and whispered something, but she brushed him off with a flick of her hand. My stomach nodded. For months, her family had made sure I was cut off from every piece of information about my father's estate, about the company he'd built. Now, here in this sterile room with Valora's mocking voice still ringing in my ears, the judge was reaching into a drawer. I glanced back at the gallery. Her brother stopped smiling. One of them shifted forward, elbows on his knees. The air felt heavier, like a storm rolling in. The judge pulled out a large envelope sealed with deep red wax. My father's crest, the old family insignia, pressed into it. I hadn't seen that crest since the funeral. My heart pounded against my ribs so hard it almost hurt. I swallowed and forced myself to breathe evenly. If I looked shocked, Valora would feed on it. If I looked eager, her lawyer would start objecting. So I leaned back, schooling my face into calm, but my fingers tightened around the pen until the metal grew warm from my skin. The judge held the envelope in both hands as though it were fragile. "And then," he said, pausing just long enough for everyone to shift in their seats, "we will address this matter." Valora's lips parted slightly, the first crack in her mask. I felt something stir in my chest. Not triumph, not yet, but a flicker of something I hadn't felt in months. A chance. A door creaking open. The judge's fingers moved slowly as he broke the wax seal, holding the envelope like it might shatter. My eyes stayed on the crest, our family's symbol pressed deep into the red wax. I'd only ever seen it on my father's personal stationery and on the wall in his study, framed like something sacred. Valora shifted beside her attorney, trying to keep her usual smirk, but I could see the tightness in her jaw now. The courtroom had gone unusually quiet. Even her family had stopped whispering. The laughter was gone. Everyone was watching that envelope like it might detonate. The judge cleared his throat, looked around the room, then began to read. This letter is a directive from the late Mr. Samuel Whitmore, to be opened and read in court upon finalization of the divorce proceedings of his son, Dorian Whitmore. He paused. It contains instructions pertaining to Mr. Whitmore's estate. My breath caught. I hadn't heard my full name spoken in that room until that moment. Dorian Whitmore. In her family's house, they called me the outsider. At work, I was just the quiet son, but hearing it from the bench, it rang with something heavier. Valora looked over at me, her expression slipping just a little. Per the letter, the judge continued, the following clauses are to be acknowledged publicly before the estate is distributed. 1. Dorian Whitmore is hereby recognized as the primary inheritor of the personal holdings of Samuel Whitmore, including, but not limited to, the Whitmore farmland property, the associated accounts held at Central Union Bank, and all residual interest in Whitmore Freight Timber. A sharp inhale cut through the courtroom. I didn't even realize it came from me. Valora turned sharply, her lips parting. "What?" she hissed, but the judge ignored her. 2 rows behind, one of her cousins muttered, "He was cut out. They said he was cut out." The judge raised his voice slightly, continuing, "In addition, Mr. Whitmore notes that this clause is to override any assumptions or informal communications regarding prior disinheritance or exclusion." Valora's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, we'd like a recess." "Sit down," she whispered through her teeth, yanking his sleeve. "This is bluff, pocket change, old land and debt." Then, right in the middle of the silence, she leaned over to her sister and said just loud enough for everyone to hear, "Watch his face. His daddy probably left him a box of dusty books and some broken tractors. Can't wait to see him cry over it. Twist the knife, why don't you?" I didn't flinch, but something burned hot under my ribs. It wasn't about the money, it never had been. It was about her knowing how deep the old wounds ran. She knew I came from a house where I was the third son, the quiet one, the one who never shouted back. The one who was told, "Let your brothers speak or stay out of grown-up business." Even my father used to say, "Dorian listens more than he talks." That's not weakness, it's control. But the truth, it always made me feel invisible. I remember one summer, maybe 10 or 11 years old, standing at the edge of the wheat field watching my brothers drive the tractor like kings of the land. I had a clipboard and a pen, taking notes like Dad asked me to, but when I tried to join them, they waved me off. "You're not built for this. Go read a book, Professor," they'd said, laughing. My dad had heard it. He didn't stop them. He just handed me a cold soda and said, "Some men run the machines, some men build the maps." I'd held on to that for years, not knowing if it was praise or just a consolation prize. Back in the courtroom, the judge paused again. "Due to the complexity of the remaining documents and counsel required, we will reconvene in 72 hours for full reading and confirmation." There was a collective sigh of relief from Valora's side. "Good," she muttered, pulling her sunglasses from her purse. "He probably put a clause in there to make him feel important. Watch. It'll vanish in the next meeting." I didn't respond. I just touched the silver pen in my pocket again, its weight grounding me. Maybe this was exactly what my father meant when he handed it to me. Not a trophy, a tool. I stayed seated as the gallery began to shift. People standing, whispering. Some looked at me now, not as a joke, not as the poor sap left behind, but like they didn't quite know where to place me anymore. I stayed still. Valora swept past me as if she hadn't just tried to humiliate me, again. "Careful not to get your hopes up, Dorian," she whispered. "The fall's worse from up there." Her heels clicked out the door. Her family followed, some of them with that same old sneer they wore when I first sat at their family dinners, trying too hard to fit in. But I wasn't the same man anymore. Maybe I'd never been what they thought I was in the first place. I stood slowly, eyes still fixed on the judge, as he sealed the envelope back inside his briefcase. This wasn't over. The courthouse door clicked shut behind me, sealing away the noise. I stepped into the chilly evening air with Valora's laughter still dancing in my ears, but beneath it, quieter, deeper, my father's voice echoed. One day, you'll need to rise or be erased. I didn't go straight home. I walked, just wandered the blocks around downtown, past the same closed storefronts and blinking red traffic lights I'd seen for years. I barely noticed them. My hand stayed in my coat pocket, fingers brushing the silver pen over and over like it might speak if I held it long enough. By the time I got back to my apartment, the sky had turned black and the quiet inside felt heavier than usual. No lights, no sounds, just me and the dull thump of thoughts knocking around my skull. I dropped my keys on the side table, slipped off my shoes, and sat down on the edge of the old recliner by the window. I didn't even turn on the lamp. The pen sat in my palm now, cool, familiar. Dangerous, in a way. I couldn't stop replaying it. Valora's voice sweet and sour at once. Can't wait to see him cry over it. Her family looking at me like I was still the hired help who got invited to Thanksgiving out of pity. The judge saying my name like it actually meant something. And that envelope. That damned envelope. I closed my eyes. My mind didn't go to the courtroom anymore. It went backwards. Christmas, maybe 10 years ago. Long table, cloth napkins, china we never used except when my brothers brought their wives. Dad at the head of the table, my two older brothers flanking him like sentries, and me, tucked at the far end across from the kids' table, not even enough room for my elbows. Every time I tried to speak, I think the freight rates on Route 93, someone cut in. My brother Micah laughed once and said, "Let the grown-ups talk, Dorian." Dad didn't say a word, just sipped his wine and looked out the window. That night, after dinner, I offered to help Dad clean up. He waved me off. "You need to learn something, son," he said, drying a glass. "Silence can guard your heart, but it can also bury your voice. Know the difference." At the time, I thought it was one of those lessons that didn't mean anything until years later. Turns out that was tonight. I flipped on the desk lamp, the same desk I'd had since college, same chair with the ripped leather arm. I didn't sit. I crouched down, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out an old file folder tucked between two tax binders. Yellowed, bent at the corners. My name scribbled on the tab in my father's handwriting. I had forgotten this. It was a draft, not a legal copy, just a rough printout from a home printer. Pages of a preliminary estate plan, dated almost 3 years ago. The first line hit me like a gut punch. Equal division of assets among all 3 sons, pending final evaluations and executor's discretion. I froze. That's not what the final will said. I flipped pages, scanning line after line. This version gave me partial ownership of the Whitmore land, not just the leftover house and equipment. It listed me as co-signer on a dormant company account, something no one ever told me existed. Why would he change this? Or did he? A thought pushed its way forward, uninvited but persistent. What if someone changed it for him? Valora always bragged that her cousin was a paralegal. My brothers had Dad's trust for years, handling papers I never even saw. Would they? I dropped into the chair, the folder spread across my lap. My mind spun with images. Micah shaking hands with lawyers, Valora standing too close at the funeral, my other brother Jared whispering about efficiency in Dad's final months. All of it looked different now. I'd always told myself that staying quiet meant staying above the mess. But maybe all it ever did was give them room to rewrite my life in my absence. I ran a finger along the page margin, then grabbed a pen, his pen, and began jotting notes. Not full thoughts yet, just fragments. Names, questions, dates. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. But I could feel it in my chest, the weight shifting. They thought I'd roll over, disappear, let them cash in and walk away. But I wasn't going anywhere. If they think I'll just vanish, I whispered to the room, they're wrong. Outside the window, the streetlight buzzed. My reflection in the glass looked tired, but focused, steady, like someone who'd been stepped on one too many times and had finally stopped making himself small. This was never about who was louder. It was about who was paying attention. And the next morning came fast, though it brought no peace. I hadn't slept much, just drifted in and out, replaying every detail of that draft will, every word my father once told me. By noon, I was staring blankly at my phone, still in my undershirt, a half-empty cup of coffee cooling beside me. Then it rang. It was Micah. "We need to talk," he said flatly. "Family meeting, 1 o'clock, the estate." He didn't ask, didn't say please, just said need. Everything in me said don't go. But I knew if I didn't show, they'd spin it however they liked. I could hear them now. Dorian's always been the weak one, too sensitive for business, never did fit in. So I showered, dressed, grabbed my coat, and slid the silver pen into my pocket. Habit now. Anchor. The drive to the estate wasn't long. It never was. But this time it felt like miles of memory pulling me backward. The gravel crunched the same way it did the day of the funeral. Same rusted mailbox. Same iron gate. Same chill that ran deeper than the weather. I pulled up beside Jared's car, parked like it owned the driveway. The front door was open, which told me they were already inside, waiting. The dining room looked just like it always did. Heavy drapes, long table, enough silverware for a banquet. What was different was the cast. Micah and Jared sat shoulder to shoulder at the far end. Valora was next to them, legs crossed, leaning back like this was her house. She didn't even blink when I walked in, just nodded. "Well, well," she murmured. "He showed." Micah motioned to a chair halfway down. "Sit." I didn't move at first. I took in the room, the missing portrait of Dad above the fireplace, the folder Jared had in front of him, the way they all avoided eye contact just long enough to rehearse whatever script they'd agreed on. Then I sat, straight back, eyes level. Micah cleared his throat. "We figured now's the time to get ahead of things. You know, make this transition smooth, respectable." Valora smiled tightly. "For the family name." Jared slid the folder across the table. "We're offering you a payout, enough to get you settled, buy something decent, cover the next chapter of your life. You'd sign off, of course. No future claims, no surprises." The words were casual, but their eyes weren't. I opened the folder. A check, 6 figures, just barely. No letter, no legal doc, yet, just numbers and a clear message. "Take this and disappear." I closed it. "Generous," Valora offered, like she was giving a wounded animal its last treat. "Clean exit," Jared added. "No drama." That's what Dad would have wanted. I glanced at them, all three. For a second, I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, the old urge to shrink, nod, comply. But then I felt it, the weight in my pocket, the silver pen, warm now from my hand, and I looked up. "If Father's voice is still in that will," I said, calm and quiet, "none of you can rewrite it." The words landed like a dropped glass. Micah blinked. Jared scoffed. Valora's lips parted slightly, not enough to speak, just enough to reveal the twitch behind them. She leaned forward. "What makes you think you know what's in the will?" I didn't answer, just sat there holding the pin between my fingers. Micah chuckled, but it was hollow. "You always did overthink things, Dorian. It's not healthy." "You think Dad gave you something," Jared added. "He didn't. You were always an extra, not essential." Valora tilted her head, voice syrupy. "Take the money, Dorian. It's more than what's coming your way, if you keep poking around." I stood, slowly. No shouting, no threats, just silence, which, finally, unnerved them. I tucked the folder under my arm, not because I wanted it, but because it was evidence now. A page in the story I hadn't finished writing yet. "I'll think about it," I said, turning toward the door. "You do that," Micah said, too quickly. I paused in the hallway, glancing once more toward the room that had always been theirs, not mine. They thought this was a closing chapter. It wasn't. The wind had picked up by the time I reached my apartment, howling like it wanted in. Rain splattered the windows as if the sky itself had opinions about the kind of man I was becoming. I slipped off my coat, kicked off my shoes, and let the door close behind me with a dull click. I didn't bother turning on the overhead light. Just the lamp near the recliner, casting that familiar amber pool of warmth that made the loneliness feel less aggressive. I dropped the folder from the estate onto the table, unopened, sat down, exhaled, and then it came back. Micah's voice. "Walk away now, Dorian. Or next time, we won't be so polite." It wasn't just a warning. It was a declaration. They'd circled the wagons. They'd decided I was the problem. Not Valora, not the silence our father wrapped us all in, not the quiet erosion of loyalty in our bloodline. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, head in my hands. The kind of posture people call dramatic if they've never truly been alone. I stayed like that for a while, just still. listening to the storm gnawing at the building, the faint creak of the floorboards settling around me like tired bones. Maybe silence is the only peace I'll ever know, I heard myself whisper. That line didn't come from nowhere. It had roots. My father once told me that silence was a shield, but he never warned me it could also become a cage. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the pen. That damn silver pen. A relic, Valora had called it. Maybe it was. Or maybe it was the only inheritance I was ever meant to have. The temptation to let go crept in slow, like fog rolling under a door. What if I signed those papers? What if I just let them have it all? The legacy, the estate, the narrative. Would that be so bad? I could move. Start over. No more meetings. No more stares from Jared. No more calculating smiles from Valora. I poured myself a drink. Something brown and numbing. The first sip was enough to make my eyes water. I didn't stop. The room blurred a little as I sat back, watching the pen glint faintly on the armrest beside me. That was when my phone buzzed. One new message. Valora. Sign the papers, Dorian. Be done with it. So simple, so cold. No, hope you're okay. No, we all want peace. Just an execution wrapped in punctuation. And for a moment, I swear, I nearly did it. My thumb hovered over the reply. I even typed 2 letters, O and K. But I didn't send it. Something stopped me. I don't know if it was the pen or the storm outside, or maybe the fact that for the first time I didn't want to be invisible anymore. Instead, I closed the message, set the phone face down, and stood up. Walked to the door to double-check the deadbolt. As I turned to head back toward the chair, I noticed something on the floor. An envelope. Slipped just inside the threshold. I stared at it. No name, no stamp. Just a manila triangle folded in on itself like a secret begging to be told. I opened it slowly, fingers clumsy from the drink. Inside was a single page, photocopied, slightly smudged, but the name was clear. My name, typed just below the heading, to be distributed upon the death of Gerald Whitmore, followed by a line of designations. Assets, percentages, specific terms, and my name, Dorian Whitmore, clearly assigned to a portion of real estate holdings and trust disbursements, not erased, not forgotten, not a ghost. It wasn't the full will, but it was enough to prove that someone knew the truth, enough to show that I had never been crazy, never just the spare wheel in the Whitmore machine. I stared at it for a long time, that photocopied truth trembling slightly in my hands, and something inside me, some part that had curled up years ago and gone quiet, sat up, not in anger, not even in pride, in clarity. This wasn't over. I didn't sleep much. The storm had passed, but its weight still pressed against my chest like a wet tarp clinging to my ribs. By the time light crept through the blinds, I was sitting at the edge of my bed, staring down at the photocopy of the will. My name was there, clear as morning. Not a footnote, not a mistake, not some clerical illusion of inclusion. It was real, and it changed everything. The silver pen rested on my nightstand. For years, I'd thought of it as a reminder of all the things I wasn't. Now, for the first time, it looked like a sword. Silence won't bury me, I muttered to myself as I rose from bed. It will bury them. After a quick shower and the strongest coffee I could brew, I threw on a clean shirt, black slacks, and slid the pen into my inside pocket like a badge of quiet defiance. I folded the photocopy carefully into an envelope, tucked it into my briefcase, and headed toward the courthouse for the follow-up hearing. The sky had cleared, but the wind hadn't lost its edge. Fall in the Midwest always carried that undertone, brisk, brittle, like things about to snap. As I approached the courthouse steps, I spotted her before she saw me, Valora. Dressed immaculately, as always, in a cream-colored trench coat and heels too high for any courtroom, leaning against the marble wall as if she owned the whole building. When her eyes landed on me, her smirk formed instantly. "Well, well, the prodigal son arrives," she said, stepping into my path. Her voice carried just enough volume to draw attention from the others filing through the front doors. "Tell me, Dorian, did you get lost on your way to irrelevance?" I didn't answer, just looked at her, steady, unblinking. "Don't embarrass yourself today," she continued, lowering her voice slightly but keeping that sickly sweet venom in her tone. Everyone knows you are just the useless son. No one expected you to last this long, let alone speak up. She waited for me to flinch, waited for the awkward silence, the lowered gaze, the sigh of defeat I'd always given her in return. But not today. I held her stare, not cold, not warm, just steady. It said more than 1,000 words. Her smile faltered. I walked past her without breaking stride. She didn't follow. Inside, I found myself a quiet bench near the end of the hallway outside courtroom 3. I didn't go in, not yet. The formal session wouldn't begin for another 20 minutes. Instead, I made a call. Ben, it's Dorian. You still practicing? Ben Carter had been a friend since college. Solid guy. 2 kids. Smart as hell. The only person I knew who had the backbone and the brain to help me without leaking a word to the vultures. He picked up on the first ring. Dorian, been years. You okay? Not really. I've got something I need you to look at. Today. 2 hours later, we were sitting in his small private office on the east side of town, 2 blocks from the river. A single fan turned in the ceiling. Coffee burned faintly from a pot left too long on the warmer. I laid the photocopy in front of him. Ben adjusted his glasses, read through it twice, then leaned back. This version isn't what they submitted to probate. I didn't think so. He tapped the bottom corner of the page. This signature matches Gerald's old estate documents. His handwriting's clean here, but it's what's not in the current file that makes this important. What do you mean? There's no record of these asset designations in the official filing. It's like this whole page vanished before the will was finalized, or someone replaced it. The words landed like a gavel inside my chest. They tampered with it, I said quietly. Ben didn't nod, but he didn't deny it either. There's enough smoke here to start a fire, he said, but we'll need more. Originals. Dated revisions, witness statements if we can find them. I kept copies, I told him. Old stuff, drafts. I didn't know they mattered until now. His eyes narrowed with something between suspicion and approval. Good. Then gather it, all of it, and don't breathe a word to anyone until I say, timing will be everything. As I left his office, the air felt sharper, cleaner. Like for the first time in years, I was standing on ground that wouldn't shift under me. I knew Valora would feel the pressure soon enough. And the family, they'd circle again, press harder, threaten more, lie better. But I also knew something else. They weren't ready for a silent man with a plan. The game had changed, but so had I. And I knew they would strike back harder than ever. That knowledge settled over me like armor the next morning when the letter arrived. A cream-colored envelope, thick with pretense and false civility, embossed with the Whitmore family crest as if that still meant something. Inside was a formal notice. Family mediation session to resolve all outstanding matters with dignity and discretion. Scheduled for 4 p.m., sharp, downtown, at a law firm I recognized from my father's former dealings. They weren't even trying to hide it. This wasn't a mediation, it was a trap. And I was walking straight into it, eyes wide open. I arrived at the law office just before 4, dressed in the same black suit I wore to his funeral. Symbolic maybe, but appropriate. The receptionist ushered me into a glass-walled conference room with walnut trim and chairs that looked comfortable but weren't meant to be sat in for long. Around the table sat my siblings, Robert, the eldest, arms crossed like a judge, Melissa, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else, and Valora, perched at the end with her usual theatrical poise. The mediator, a graying man in a tight blazer, gave me a tight smile. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Whitmore." I nodded, took the seat across from Valora. My silver pen rested in my inner pocket, close to my heart. It didn't take long before the gloves came off. Robert opened a folder and slid it toward the mediator. "Before we begin," he said, voice clipped, "we think it's only fair to disclose a few financial irregularities tied to our brother's past involvement with the foundation." My stomach clenched. Here it came. Twist S13 landed with precision. The papers were filled with doctored figures, false transfers, signatures I didn't recognize, claims that I had funneled money into private accounts, racked up debts, drained our late father's resources. Valora leaned in. "We didn't want to bring this up. Truly, But the truth matters. And if Dorian wants a piece of the estate, shouldn't we ask if he's earned it? I glanced at the mediator, his lips pressed into a thin line, unsure. The air in the room grew heavy with implication. "You think I did this?" I asked, voice steady. "You did something," Robert said. "Or nothing," Valora added, feigning pity, "which is somehow worse." Their words echoed off the glass walls. I didn't respond. Instead, I studied their faces. They weren't worried. They were performing. This was theater. For the mediator, for the paper trail, for the family history they were rewriting in real time. Then Valora leaned forward, just close enough that the others couldn't hear, and whispered, "Even dead, your father didn't love you enough to save you." It hit harder than I expected. Not the words themselves, I'd told myself versions of them for years, but hearing them from her, here, with such quiet cruelty, was different. And for one long second, I saw red. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table. My pulse roared in my ears. I could have stood, thrown the papers back in their smug faces, shouted everything I'd kept buried for decades. But I didn't. Instead, I reached into my briefcase, pulled out a folder, and placed a single page on the table. A photocopy. Not the original, not everything. Just enough. "This," I said quietly, "is a draft of our father's will. It predates the version currently in probate. It shows intent, clear, signed intent, to include me in the primary asset distribution, with no mention of any debt, no claims of mismanagement." The room went still. Valora's lips parted, but no words came. Robert shifted in his chair, suddenly less sure. The mediator leaned forward, scanning the page. "I'm not here to fight," I added, "but I won't be erased. Not again." Silence stretched. For the first time in these so-called family meetings, I wasn't the one on the defensive. And Valora tried to regain control. "Where did you get this?" she asked, voice tight. "Where it came from doesn't matter yet. What matters is that it exists, and I'm not the only one who knows about it." I didn't smile, didn't gloat, just stood, calmly gathered my papers, and buttoned my jacket. "We're done here." As I walked toward the door, Valora called after me, her voice less composed than usual. "You're bluffing, Dorian. You always were." I didn't turn around. They thought I was bluffing, but the storm I had been holding back was about to break. I barely slept the night before court. The photocopy of my father's draft will sat on my kitchen table, next to the silver pen. I kept staring at both as if one might explain the other. Proof of intent beside the echo of legacy. That pen had once reminded me of all the things I wasn't. That morning, it reminded me of everything I could still become. By 9:15 a.m., I was seated on the hard wooden bench outside courtroom 2B, the final hearing on the estate scheduled for the next hour. Valora arrived at 9:28, flanked by Robert and Melissa. They walked in like they owned the oxygen in the room. Robert didn't even glance at me. Melissa offered a brittle smile. Valora, of course, couldn't help herself. "You still going through with this?" she asked, voice syrupy. "It's not too late to save face." I gave her a look that said more than words ever could. She turned away. 10 minutes later, we were called in. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No jury box, just pew-like benches, a clerk, and the judge's bench at the far end. Judge Kessler was presiding, early 70s, sharp eyes behind thick glasses. I'd heard he hated delays and despised drama. I liked him already. "Let's proceed," he said without preamble. "We're here to finalize the Whitmore estate allocations and resolve the objections raised." Valora's attorney stood first, polished, smug. He launched into a rehearsed summary of concerns over mental capacity, misplaced documents, and long-standing financial missteps tied to me. He didn't look at me once. Then came the moment. Judge Kessler tapped a thick manila envelope beside him. "I have reviewed the sealed addendum to Mr. Whitmore's will, as per court authorization," he began. Valora stiffened in her chair. Contrary to previous filings, the sealed section, dated 6 weeks prior to the primary will, contains detailed directives regarding distribution. Specifically, it assigns primary ownership of Whitmore Holdings' West properties, 2 trust accounts, and oversight of the Whitmore Foundation's board seat to Dorian Whitmore. The room dropped into silence. Not a sound, no rustle of paper, no cough, not even Valora's usual smug breathing. Then came a single gasp. From Melissa. Judge Kessler looked up. These clauses bear verified signatures, matched handwriting samples, and the legal witness of Joseph M. Kern, whose notarized affidavit is included. There is no evidence of forgery. Twist S-15 had landed, and it shattered the courtroom's balance like glass. Robert's face flushed with a kind of heat I hadn't seen since we were kids. Melissa looked like she might faint. Valora? Her eyes flared, but she stayed quiet until she didn't. He faked it, she said suddenly. He must have. That page, someone planted it. It's not real. This is a setup. Her voice cracked midway through, like her control was slipping through her perfectly manicured fingers. The judge didn't flinch. Miss Whitmore, I'll remind you this is not a theatrical stage. I have reviewed the seals myself. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. Valora's mouth opened, but no words came. She sat back down. I stood. For the first time in all these months, I spoke not to them but to the room. You tried to erase me, I said quietly. But my father knew who I was. You don't have to like that, but no lie, no smear, can bury the truth forever. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a victory lap. It was just truth. And truth in that moment weighed more than all their lies. The judge nodded. Mr. Whitmore, do you acknowledge receipt of your assignments? I reached into my jacket, pulled out the pen, the silver one, the same pen my father used to write his last letter to me. The one I had once thought was a cruel reminder of being passed over. I clicked it open and signed. Valora stared, not at the paper, at the pen. Her face said it all. She recognized it. She knew that pen had been in our father's hands, and now it was in mine. A seal of continuity, a signature of closure. The gavel came down like thunder. Court adjourned. The courtroom erupted into chaos, but for the first time, I wasn't the one left standing in silence. People shouted, lawyers, clerks, voices overlapping. Robert banged a fist on the bench behind him. Melissa gasped like the air had turned toxic. Valora. She stood frozen, lips parted, but no sound came. Just her eyes, wide, wild, stripped of the smugness they'd carried for decades. Judge Kessler raised his hand, voice sharp. Enough! Order! And just like that, silence returned. But it had shifted sides. Valora's attorney leaned in, whispering furiously into her ear, his calm veneer unraveling. She tried to protest again, louder this time, but the judge cut her off with a cold finality. This court is opening an inquiry into potential fraud and tampering regarding this estate's administration. Any party found complicit will face legal consequences. Her breath caught. For the first time, she looked small. I didn't look back at her as I gathered my things. I didn't need to. The balance of power had tilted, and she knew it. Every whisper that had once slithered through this courtroom about me, about my worthlessness, was now redirected toward them, toward the ones who had mocked, minimized, and erased. I stepped out of the courtroom, letting the door click shut behind me. The corridor outside was oddly quiet for such a dramatic morning, just the dull echo of footsteps and the distant hum of fluorescent lights. In my jacket pocket, the silver pen still rested, warm from my hand. I pulled it out and looked at it, not with resentment, but with a kind of quiet awe. It had signed the final papers. It had seen the truth unfold, a tool my father had left behind. Not a weapon, not a burden, just a reminder. He'd never said the words, never told me I mattered, but he gave me this. I walked down the hallway slowly, letting the moment stretch. As I exited the building, sunlight spilled across the stone steps like a benediction. The wind was cool, brushing past my collar. She was there. Valora stood near the base of the steps, alone. No lawyers, no entourage, just her and the brittle remains of a plan that had crumbled in front of a judge. She didn't speak, just glared, pale, hollow, her hands clenched at her sides like she couldn't decide whether to fight or flee. I didn't stop walking. I didn't return the glare. She had said so much over the years, told me who I was, what I wasn't, what I'd never be. Now, her silence was deafening. Robert stood a few feet behind her, arms crossed, gaze averted. Melissa stared at the ground, her face blank. They didn't speak either. None of them did. I passed them like shadows. No need for gloating. No need for vengeance. They had already done it to themselves. A few reporters lingered near the sidewalk, murmuring, pointing microphones. I kept my head down, eyes fixed on the curb. When one of them called my name, I didn't stop. I turned the corner, left the courthouse behind, and found myself walking without thinking. Block after block, city noise fading into the background. There was no destination, just motion. My footsteps steady, my breath slow. For years, I had walked among them like a ghost. Heard the laughter behind closed doors, the polite dismissals at family dinners. I'd been the invisible son, the inconvenient truth they never wanted to face. Now, I was something else. Vindicated. Maybe. Whole. Not yet. But real. Present. Unshakable. The scars would remain. That much I knew. There was no reclaiming the years they'd taken from me, no rewriting the moments I had spent questioning my own worth. But I had chosen not to become bitter. Bitterness was still a chain, just gilded differently. Instead, I held that pen again and whispered into the breeze, I am not the forgotten son. I never was. There was no applause, no final scene. Just my shadow stretching long in the autumn light, the courthouse now a silent monolith behind me. And as I walked away from the courthouse steps, I realized that sometimes the loudest victory is won in silence,